when politics are very tense, as they tend to be on occasions, casual remarks can be taken into contexts that are, to say the least, invented. But I do wish somebody had explained to me a long time ago when I was in my 20s, 40 years ago, that it's difficult for a famous person to appreciate the concerns of an unknown person. Likewise, it's difficult for an unknown person to appreciate the concerns of a famous person. But it goes without saying that I was just trying to blend in a crowd that I felt, while not exactly Edgar Allan Poe, had some talent. And it got mixed up all over the place with people who also liked them and felt that they shouldn't be encouraging me. And this makes for an interesting point of view because I think each of us have our own status quo. I like Alexander Dugin's take on Russians' truth being particular to them, that nobody speaks for everybody. Because there's a tendency in diplomatic relations to come to a big picture piece that serves one side. And diplomacy is being able to appreciate and stand off, not push ideas that aren't helpful. Now, some ideas are rejected where they are prominent. One can't say, for example, that the Afghanistan leadership treatment of women is a relative truth. It's terribly sad. One cannot approve of the devastation visited on the Ukraine. It's just not possible. One can likewise not approve of what we did to Iraq. When I say we, it's because I'm an American citizen. But I live in a much more small world than that. If my words are taken to inspire people who have more power than me, that is very decidedly their doing. I'm not out shopping to encourage troublemakers. Far from it. I live in a very little world. There are people who measure everything by the economic violence that they visit on me. If they don't get to visit economic violence on me, then they have failed their test of manhood or something. Oh, I can see the media has a lot of defective purposes. I've lived among Chinese people. They're very fine people. Not everybody who's um, on the margins is free from dementia or criminal tendencies. We have a very complicated society when it comes to thieving and lying and all of the other things that make the world go round for some people. My best friend was a very poor Korean girl. Nobody has any qualities that are better than her. It's frustrating to know the history of some of our relations with people who media bashes. And our own intellectual heritage tends to play out its long spell of notions to certain consecrated ideas about how things are. I don't think I've said anything wrong. I certainly haven't said anything untruthful. When it came to the arts, I tried to blend in. It's hard to believe that became as problematic as it did. I'm aware that the way that neighborhood kids slip around in America, or at least used to, isn't the sort of story that makes for credible presentation of it aspirant to recognition in the United Nations. But I hardly see how the childish attack clubs, the religiously pure and well-to-do elect in those crowds, is any kind of improvement. They live to be mocking. The proper way to go about diplomatic relations is to prepare yourself for the job you seek, not to be floated up like some kind of bizarre buoy device. I can imagine it might be painful for somebody who likes me, likes my poetry, to feel that my sensibilities about things exclude them. I've been myself very maliciously assided by those who have the power to do that as songwriters. I don't think I'm that deceitful, to be perfectly truthful. I don't sit in a position of prominence that has consequences for people. If I did, I would do my level best to remind people of the valor, character, and depth of feeling among those who are impoverished through no fault of their own, in the hopes of bringing about a greater sense of generosity towards the efforts to rescue cultures that are needlessly denied clean water, healthy food, health care, education, and social care supports. largely because of waste by large organized crowds of people. But of course, I don't occupy such a position. If I had money of my own, I would keep it because I don't approve of the way that I've been used. I read nothing but hostility for human dignity in the way that I've been used. And people who feel excluded, even though I care about them, would like to include them in my poetry, have to understand I'm not a tribute artificial intelligence unit. Things have to sink in. They have to mean something. And what they mean has to be reflected somehow that I can aspire to communicate in a voice of my own. Why? And that doesn't always happen. My mother said that I dated a girl who nobody could possibly not like. And that indeed, she's the one person I never seemed to distrust at all. She's right about that. It's not that Kathy stood by me in the end, but she knew I had to move on to fulfill what she couldn't help me with anymore, which was my quest to understand why certain things were being done to me and being done towards me and by who. I never wrote poetry for her. The painting I did of her had a beautiful image of me, but somehow what was tormenting me came out in her. It was almost like she had been my exorcist. But I loved her. Make no mistake about that. I never wrote much of a poem for Rose or Midori. The poem was the same one. Although it's a good poem, it amounts to nothing. They amount to nothing. Greta was the one woman who finally moved me to words. I'd always wanted to hear my heart find a voice that way. So I'm very grateful. There were other girls. Took me to bed, hung out with me, taught me something about art, carried on with Ray, who was my friend for a long time. And they kind of come up in memoir notes occasionally, or I'm forced to divulge things by the headhunters to show that they were libeling me for some bizarre reason. Or worse, were actually part of the crowd that pulled this monotonous infamy, this narrative thing that they have going with New York. Most of them were okay people, good people. Nothing I care to show, nothing I wouldn't say. And it's not that they didn't touch me. It's just that I don't reach that easily. I have high value to my poetry. It's one thing to write a letter. It's one thing to write a memory. It's one thing to write an aside. or an anecdote. It's one thing to write a tribute. It's altogether another thing to write a poem. The way I write poems is not something I think is really all that worthy of emulation, no matter how much you might like my work. It's simpleton stuff. I want it to be memorable. I want it to have a visual aspect of sorts that sort of sticks in my mind. I want it to be sincere. It's very important to me. One of my girlfriends, who was quite a star when it came to burdening me with the oppression of her views, commented that I was a sincere singer. I was even surprised how commanding her own voice was. But sincerity for her was just a Hollywood trinket to put on for the occasion. I've grown wary of Hollywood. They can do things on demand. People enjoy it, and they're conscripted by their enjoyment. And of course, many people know that I've come down the turnpike to a toll booth that says Hollywood not welcome. I've come to dislike Hollywood. Really dislike them. I think that they are criminally insane. When I hear celebrities say The Diva is their favorite movie, I know who that celebrity is because I know what Diva is. There are social movements in the world that are cross purposes with my status quo. My status quo is that dignity forbids you to think badly of the poor or to take the hard work of another. Thieves can be very, very inventive. Why, Mr. John Shulman had the whole world at my throat. He was very good. He was good at what he did. Friends of old friends can be that way, but they're wrong. They have no credibility and no grasp. They're stealing from the person they claim to be protecting. Stealing what I know. It's dignity. Another factor in my status quo is I believe in dignity. I believe it's important to understand that people are at the mercy of things they'd rather not be some of the time, particularly children. It's hard to grow up in a madhouse, so we have to work to make it less angry, less hateful, less spiteful, less mean spirited, but above all, less weird. There's a weird French in American politics. Scaring others, people who aren't American. They look at us They see us at the mercy of this sadistic fringe. And they say, oh my God, how are we going to help ourselves? We can't trust people who have the power to help us. And they're doing wrong, pumping fossil fuel into the atmosphere the way we are, refusing to talk about the question, do we love our cars that much more than our children's futures? That we won't even consider restraining our gluttony. These aren't imaginary questions from the naive idealism of an aquarium. This is a person who's walked across and almost fallen through holes in bridges like the Fernhollow Bridge that fell, always being reassured that administration knows what it's doing. Being lied to and lied about over and over and over again, and then told what's wrong with brilliant people from other nations. And I'm often laughed at. It's kept me in my place. It's why I made the mistake of reaching out to somebody who I thought had a good mind, because he was too powerful. I should have seen that the way the people picked on me was irregular enough that somebody very powerful must be behind it. And I turned for help right to the cruel person who was at work. I'm not sure it's ground to mock somebody, but it's certainly grounds not to wonder about their judgment. So I abstain from making powerful proclamations. But Zell spoke as reported in the context that can only mean that the city government in Seattle was purposefully deceiving people they purposefully injure for truly torturous ends. I've been sadly diagnosed with Parkinson's. And believe me, I feel it. Not that many people in the world have this condition. More people in America, it seems, than anywhere else. And all the evidence shows it was done specifically and deliberately by people who felt they controlled the open mic. Doesn't get much worse than what was done to me, but it gets pretty bad. And then, of course, there's war, but nobody should wish that on anyone else. Nobody should ever recklessly endanger all of us with it. So we need to cool it as a species and think more carefully about how we get conscripted by spurious ideas in a weird media. I try not to contribute to that. I have my status quo, things I like, things I approve of, people I certainly think about, and maybe someday will write a poem about. It's important to remember that those things happen by gestation. not really by conscious intent. I think my point is to get across the difference between being somebody who goes out of their way to pick and choose poems to put on a performance for a stunt, and a person who just loves the search for a voice that brings clarity to something they appreciate and admire. And it's very painful to be used for it.